Trustee Thomas is unable to be with us tonight in person, but he filed the requisite paperwork to participate by telephone. Is there any objection to his participating by phone? Let the record reflect that my friend Andrew thinks it's a great idea.
Good idea.
Would you call the roll, please?
Trustee Collins.
Here.
Trustee Hayek.
Here.
Trustee Miller.
Here.
Trustee Pierce.
Here.
Trustee Solomon.
Here.
And Trustee Thomas.
Here.
Thank you. Bruce, would you give us a quick recap of the year and what went on in our Finance Committee meeting, please?
I will. I'm going to punt this, though, to two other people. We had a review of the end-of-year finances, which I'm going to ask our Finance Director, Dave Clark, to give in a moment. We also spent some time talking about your trip to Springfield and what the discussions about the state's finances will mean for the village, which you indicated you would cover in the President's report later. So with that, I will turn it now to Dave Clark, who will give us a brief presentation on the year-end.
I do not have the slides up here for the screen, but we can post it on the website. So if anybody wants to access that information, they can do so later. Fiscal year 15 ended February 28th, and the village finished with $25.8 million in expenditure, which was with $43,817 of budget, or 99.8% of budget, which was very good news, right on target with the expenditure side of the budget. On the revenue side of the budget, the village finished with $21.8 million in revenue versus a $21.3 million budget, $500,000 in excess, or 102% of budget. The general fund, unaudited fund balance was $3.3 million, or 23.1% of operating expenditures, versus a target of $1.4 million, or 10% of operating expenditures. The fiscal year 2015 budget actually anticipated a spend down in fund balance of $915,000. The actual reduction in fund balance was $67,000. The operating budgets all finished for fiscal year 15 in excess of fund balance targets. Police pension fund contribution finished at the budgeted level of about $1.4 million, and the village was able to make a transfer to the garbage fund anticipated of $437,000. The water fund finished with a ending balance of $1.6 million, which is actually 84% of operating expenditures, a little bit high. This is basically due to a budgetary change as far as related to the using a 5-year average of consumption. When there was a downturn in the economy, that 5-year average did not serve the village well, and we picked a lower level of consumption going forward and have exceeded the target there quite substantially. The garbage fund finished at 19.5% of or $247,000 as its projected ending fund balance. Revenues or expenditures for salaries finished at 101.2% of budget, with regular salaries, temporary salaries, and employee benefits actually finishing at levels lower than the annual budget. And the items over budget were salaries for overtime and other miscellaneous benefits. Again, that's $160,000 over budget. The remainder of the budget was actually $195,000 less than budgeted, or at 98.4% of budget. On the revenue side, the village finished, again, the total budget was 102.3% of the budget, with sales tax coming in $242,000 ahead of budget. Building permits, $472,000 ahead of budget. So those were two substantial variances from the budget. Water sales were less than projected, 85.7% of budget, which was $297,000 less than the budgeted amount. Of the amount of the village's revenue budget, with concerns expressed are about certain actions that could be potentially coming from through the state of Illinois related to state share sources of revenue. The village finished the year with $3.7 million of its revenue coming from funds that are in some way or another passing through or handled by the state of Illinois. And that's a fairly substantial figure as the village staff evaluates its future financial condition and the resources available in fund balances to weather adverse actions by the state of Illinois.
Thank you. And I will add, we did ask staff if they're doing contingency planning around what the state's budget deliberations may mean, and they are beginning that process. It is just too early to know what the state negotiations will mean for us, but we assume that in some way we're going to have to make some changes. It's just a little early to know how much and where. That's the report.
Thank you, Bruce. Are there any questions on the consent agenda? Could I have a motion to adopt the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Would you call the roll, please?
Trustee Collins?
Yes.
Trustee Hayek?
Yes.
Trustee Miller?
Yes.
Trustee Pierce?
Yes.
Trustee Solomon?
Yes.
Trustee Thomas?
Okay, the next order of business is if there's anyone in the public that wishes to comment on an item that is not on the agenda, this would be the time for that to take place, to let us know. Is there anyone who wishes to comment? Okay. Could I have the village manager's report, please?
Thank you, Mr. President. Tonight I am it'll be a relatively brief report. I'm not actually going to speak. I'm going to kick it over to Dave Clark again, who's going to give a brief update on where things stand with the modified vehicle and pet license and alarm permit renewal process that we recently consolidated into one, and we're ready to start sending materials out relative to that. So Dave, if you could just walk us through that.
The applications have not been mailed yet, but rest assured they will be. During the past year, the village staff has reviewed processes and procedures associated with the annual renewal process. Typically, the renewal process has included vehicle and pet licenses only. This year, we're including vehicle, pets, and the alarm permit, the annual alarm permit process, as part of a single mailing. These actions were taken as a result of some modifications to those sections of the code by the village board on December 18, 2014. Specifically, some of the changes in the process will eliminate one 1,400-piece mailing, specifically the alarm permit mailing that we have done in the past. We're going to be able to leverage the existing software. Typically in the past, the vehicle license process, we collect the revenue, we issue the licenses, and then we go back later and update the database. This year we're actually going to be able to do it live and have live data available for public safety related to vehicle licenses and related to pet licensing on a real-time basis. There should be some reduced associated administrative expense related to the alarm permit process. There's a simplification of the rates and fees, the fee schedule intended for resident use. There'll be a reduction in the time associated with also some of the back-end fulfillment process and verifying the accuracy and sufficiency of information by simplifications made via the code modifications. And for the first time, we're beginning to get to the point of having this process online. We actually had hoped to have it fully online for residents to be able to update information related to their licenses. We're not there yet, but if residents receive applications where there are no changes, which we do receive a sizable number of unaltered applications, residents will be able to pay online for those licenses and have those fulfilled without having to mail anything back to the building. The updates, again, all these updates have resulted in somewhat of a delay, and we're also working with the state of Illinois through their Illinois e-pay process. We're making modifications there to allow for the payment of vehicle licenses, and we're waiting for final confirmation that the software is live and ready to go.
That's the conclusion of the It's the conclusion of the manager's report, unless there are any questions from the board. Thank you.
Trustee Miller, could you enlighten us as to the meetings that have been held by the Plan Commission? I think there have been 2 since we last met.
Actually, in the last meeting, the only thing that happened, I was not there, so I can't report well. I just know it was reported in the press release, and that was the Infinity dealership had an appearance review, a successful appearance review, but nothing substantive on the ongoing downtown tune-up.
Okay, thank you, Barbara. Trustee Thomas, how about the Ball Committee, which met, I believe, on February 23rd?
We are meeting, we did meet the February 23rd. We are meeting this coming Monday. So we don't really have much new to report. In the last meeting, we unanimously approved the budget. Then the board subsequently approved the budget for 2016. And the good news is right now it appears that for our current tea times will exceed our budget. And we're looking forward to good weather.
Excellent, thank you.
I would just add that the golf manager advised me this evening that we are at budget for the month of March because we were able to open early already. So good weather is already treating the golf course well, which is a good thing.
Excellent.
That's good, because I wasn't there during the good weather.
That's one round we should have had and didn't.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. I was down here.
All right, this is National Fair Housing Month, and as you know, in your packet of materials, we included a proclamation that we normally adopt to designate this as National Fair Housing Month. Could I have a motion to adopt the proclamation, please?
So moved.
I second.
Well, let's see. I think we can do that by voice vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. The other proclamation in your materials was the Breathe Deep North Shore Day, which is the day that is put on to raise awareness and funds for lung cancer, a very worthy cause. I participated in their various things last year, and they've asked us to issue a proclamation again this year and to participate. Could I have a motion to adopt the proclamation on the Breathe Deep North Shore Day?
So moved.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Okay, as was mentioned by Bruce, Trustee Collin, I am going to report very briefly on my past 3 days that I spent in Springfield working with our state government on where we're going as to things that they are talking about doing with respect to local municipalities, meeting with the governor and the legislature and that. It is fair to say that the state has a very serious problem in that they budgeted and adopted a budget and have been spending based on the idea that the income tax, the temporary increase, would in fact be extended and was not. And so they're now between today and June 30th facing a very real crisis for the rest of their fiscal year. And they have a hole of about $1.6 billion that they have to figure out how to fund, since they would like to continue to pay prison guards and other people. And as promised in the course of the campaigns, Governor Rauner said if he was elected he would shake up Springfield, and I can tell you that he has done a phenomenal job of shaking them up. That there is nobody there in the legislature, the governor's office, that says this is like any other year that we've had in the last 40 years in Illinois. So there is a lot going on in the dynamics of that. And as I reported last week, among the things that were discussed in the budget was a question of whether the state should take back the distributive funds, the portion of the state income tax that is designated to go to local governments, and should they freeze property taxes. And those were two very key elements that many of us from local government were in Springfield talking to the legislature and to the governor about for the past several days. It appears that they have not gotten to where they have any clear understanding of how they're going to either handle this short period or their next budget. As best we can tell, there is a deal being floated and discussed that might possibly cost us a portion of our distributive share for the next few months through June 30th. And so we're looking at the impacts of that if that were to occur in our budget. And while local governments explain that having done such a great job of bankrupting the state, it was not appropriate to then decide their next task should bankrupt local governments, that doesn't appear to me necessarily to be something that is going to carry the day with all of the nice people in Springfield, because they still are short, so they have to figure out what to do. And as of now, there's been no agreement that they will raise any additional revenue, so they have to figure out, based on the revenues they have, how they're going to handle it. So those two are two different things. They still have a little more time to figure out how they're going to handle next year's budgeting process, and they are going through that. And so there is this wonderful dance going on between the executive branch and the legislative branch. As I reported to the Finance Committee, the expectation is that the local governments will continue to try to explain why some of the measures, such as taking the distributive share, are a true disaster and inappropriate. And the legislature and the governor's office will continue to try and think about whether they agree with us or not. But it is not the least bit unlikely that they will take away some funds from local governments that are there, whether it's sales tax, distributive share, or other things. At the same time, they do talk about possibly increasing revenues by adding to the sales tax what I would call a service tax, which may gain some plus in funds for local government, but certainly not anything matching what they're talking about taking away. So as I said before, the governor has recommended reducing distributed funds by 54%. I don't know that the legislature has an appetite to do that. We will have to see what comes, and we'll have to see what their negotiations are. But it's very clear that nobody in Springfield today has any idea what the resolution of this is going to be. So we're going to try and make plans. They've talked about sweeping some funds from the sales tax. They discovered an extra $50 million that they don't know where it came from sitting there, and they're talking about a possible one-time sweep to try and help how they handle the next few months till June 30th. So they're looking at everything, and nobody knows where it's all going to go. But I will continue, or we will continue in terms of the village, to represent our residents and try to make sure that they think about the impact of the things they do. And they assure us they will try and listen. That doesn't mean that it will help. Our next board meeting will be April the 16th. So I just point that out to everybody, and hopefully we'll recover Trustee Thomas and have our full complement. Our next order of business is the Village Electricity Aggregation Program. Phil, do you want to fill us in on where we are on that?
I would be happy to, thank you. I will be providing a brief presentation to the board tonight, and hopefully this little clicker works. I seldom run a PowerPoint from this seat, but I wanted to bring the board, or to advise the board this evening of a recommendation related to a resolution approving a contract for the provision of electricity for the village's electricity aggregation program with Integrys Energy Services. Just to give a bit of background on aggregation in Glencoe, this is an issue that's relatively new to us. Back in 2011, residents approved a referendum question that authorized the village to enter into, on behalf of our residents, contracts to provide aggregated electricity services. At that time, as you may recall, ComEd rates were quite high, and they had been locked into several long-term contracts. So following the approval of the referendum by voters in the fall of 2011, the North Shore Electricity Aggregation Consortium was formed. It is an 8-member group of communities that remain working together. Each community executed a 3-year contract with the same selected alternative energy supplier, which is MC Squared, to supply power to the approximately 90,000 residents within the consortium communities. That is a 3-year contract that is nearing its expiration in May of 2015. Just as by means of reminder, this contract is one where the village chose a standard supply mix of power where residents had the option to choose 100% renewable energy if they chose to. Otherwise, they would receive the state mandated portion of renewable energy. By all accounts, it's been a very successful program. Since 2012, when we entered into it, we anticipate that Glencoe alone has saved, residents in Glencoe, I should say, have saved about $2.3 million and $36.5 million consortium-wide. A couple things to note, though, relative to this program. 2015 is not 2012. It is a bit of a different environment. ComEd rates no longer are set once per year. They're now set on a multiple time per year basis. And the purchase electricity adjustment has added some question as well as to how predictable rates will be. Of course, as I mentioned before, the first year of the program was a great year. We saw about 40% savings over ComEd rates. Those savings changed to about 15% in the second year, and in the last and current year, we're anticipating approximately 5 to 6% savings over ComEd's prices. Even so, there has been some question as to whether there's value to continuing an aggregation program. Even so, the consortium in its discussions believes that there is still further value to an aggregation program, namely that we maintain contract flexibility. With maintaining a program such as this, we are able to, in many ways, impact how we can continue to save residents money in situations where rate structures are favorable to us in that way. We have been able to, in this round of discussions, figure out a way to negotiate a contract that does not require a price lock. That was not the case in 2012. We did require a price lock once a year. Because of what I was mentioning with ComEd's flexibility and its rate structure, there is some concern about a price lock, but there is some thought that given proper market conditions, we would still see about the same amount of savings as we're seeing in this current year if we were to lock a price. And I think an interesting component to this that was not discussed back in 2012 was the possibility of coming up with an opportunity to save residents some money on natural gas, and I will discuss that a bit more as we go through the presentation. So there was a process that was initiated in anticipation of the village's agreement expiring in May to go through a RFP process. The consortium initiated an RFP process in November of 2014. We received 2 responses to that. Integrys Energy Services and MC Squared, who is the incumbent. Integrys was the most competitive with their proposals. Their vendor margin, among other factors, were the most competitive. We initiated staff as well as our consultants in Holland and Knight, who represents the consortium, extensive negotiations with Integrys to determine the power supply agreement that you see this evening in the agenda. And after a great deal of deliberation, the consortium developed a recommendation that a new power supply agreement with Integrys should be approved by the corporate authorities in the member communities. A few key contract terms. This is a shorter term contract than what we had done in 2012. That is in anticipation of the market remaining somewhat unpredictable. The big change, as I've already mentioned, is that there is no requirement to lock a price. If pricing is not locked, all customers would return to ComEd. The village would retain the right to price lock again, either later this year or into 2016, if market conditions were favorable to do so. Residents still have the opportunity at any time, whether with integrys or others, to choose their own vendor at no risk. They can get out of the aggregated contract. They can do their own investigations through the ICC and the Citizens Utility Board. Essentially, there is very little risk to the individual resident. Vendor margin is approximately $1.10 per megawatt hour, slightly higher than what we saw with MC Squared in their last contract, but very much in line with what the last year of their contract, but very much in line with what we saw in the first year of our contract with them. They came back to us with a much higher vendor margin than what integrys was willing to do. We went back to them and tried to ascertain why that was, and they didn't really give us a good answer. But integrys seemed very willing to work with us on that point. A few additional key contract terms. We would see very similar, if not exactly the same, customer service standards. 24/7 telephone number, a price to compare website. As I've mentioned already, no fee for getting in or out if you're a resident or small business. And I think this is the point that makes it most interesting. There's an opportunity for a natural gas endorsement program. Right now, state statute does not allow for the village to aggregate natural gas on a opt-out basis, which is how we handle electricity. There's been discussion in Springfield over the last several years about legislation related to this. It certainly would be favorable from our perspective. What this endorsement program essentially would be a negotiated program that the consortium would undertake with integrys to provide an alternative for a natural gas provider aside from North Shore Gas. This would be an optional opt-in only program that residents would have the ability to, if they decided to do so, opt in. And what predictions have been in terms of rate savings are somewhere between 12 and 15%. So not insubstantial. The natural gas market is not the same as the electricity market. We certainly realize that. But being that this would be an optional program, certainly would, we believe, provide some value to our residents. The details of such a program, as I mentioned, would still need to be worked out, and that is a provision of the contract. Finally, the ultimate recommendation, as I've mentioned already, from the consortium is that the board approve a resolution to authorize a power supply agreement with integrys. I've gone through the majority of the contract terms. One other that I would state is that there still is the recommendation from staff that we would maintain the standard supply mix of renewable energy. Still provides the opportunity for residents on an optional basis to opt in to a full REC or different level as they may be interested. We would be, if the board approves this resolution this evening, we would be looking at a price lock period that would likely commence the middle part of next week and would have to be finalized by April 7th. April 7th, yeah, April 7th. And if market conditions are not favorable, we would not lock a price. What that means is that residents would move back to ComEd. We would continue to monitor the situation. Residents would be able to enter into alternative agreements if they so chose. And if market conditions were favorable again, we would entertain a price lock period again in the future that would benefit those residents in the village. So with that is, I understand, probably not the briefest overview of this topic, but I'd be happy to answer any questions the board may have.
Hey, Phil, question from my standpoint. Reading the memo, it looked like the consortium would together make a determination as to whether to lock, whereas from your description it sounds like the village would. Can you confirm is the village's option or the consortium acting
Sure.
as a whole?
We meet together as a group,
Yeah.
and if one community chooses not to price lock, we have the ability to not price lock.
I see.
But we generally do it, if we do it, we do it on the same day,
Right.
so as to not pit one community against another. That's kind of the way we function. But in this particular iteration, we would not be required to do so.
So you could almost opt out of when the consortium opts in.
Correct.
Would be the way to think about it.
Mhm.
Okay.
Any other questions? Could I have a motion to adopt the resolution?
So moved.
Could I have a roll call, please?
Trustee Collins.
Mr. President,
Oh, sorry.
before we do the roll call, this is Dale Thomas. With the agreement of the village attorney, I will be recusing myself from this vote because I provide legal representation to comment from time to time.
Okay.
With that change, would you call the roll?
Trustee Collins.
Yes.
Trustee Hayek.
Yes.
Trustee Miller.
Yes.
Trustee Pierce. Trustee Solomon.
Yes.
And Trustee Thomas is recused.
Okay, the integrys resolution passed.
Thank you.
Tonight, the board receives Strand's analysis of the village's water system, including the production facility, and Strand's basic evaluation of each of the potential alternative options for meeting the village's water needs for the future. The purpose of this report is to help the board evaluate the options that are available to the village so that we may understand which are viable enough to warrant further, more detailed study and consideration. The Strand report is not intended to provide all the costs associated with each option, but rather focuses on the basic costs to construct each alternative and the engineering best practices in evaluating their viability. Once the options are narrowed, there will be numerous considerations that require further study before any final decision can be made. We are just beginning the phase I call information and education. This phase may be 12 to 24 months. Based on this report, as part of our information and education process, the alternatives will be narrowed to options that are collectively appropriate to pursue further investigation. Eventually, we will then be able to better explore which one, based on further study, best serves our village's needs. As we have always indicated, this is an issue of great community importance, and because of that, will require great care and analysis in evaluating the final options that are available to us. Thus, tonight is only the first of a series of steps the board will take in determining the long-term solution that is best for Glencoe. There will be no discussions by the board tonight. This is a learning process piece. Not discussions, there'll be no decisions by the board tonight, because this is merely a learning process piece. Along the way, we will engage the community, inform them of each step of the process, and detailing the work that still needs to be done so that the community will have an opportunity to dialogue and participate in that. This will ensure that our residents are informed and engaged as we work towards a final decision. Thus, tonight, our board will be briefed on the report, and once that is complete, the board will have a chance to ask any questions they have about the report itself at this time before they've had an opportunity to study it in more detail. Let me repeat, since this is not a public hearing, nor a time for the board to conduct discussions other than as informational discussions, no vote will be taken on this matter this evening. We are not entertaining public comment or questions at this time. As part of the briefing tonight, staff will share more information about our forthcoming communication and public input process that will take place over the next several months. As you will learn from the briefing, we will post the report on the website so everyone can read it and think how best to participate in our exploration of the contents of the report. We will be hosting an open house here at Village Hall to help further educate our residents. We'll have a series of smaller gatherings hosted by the Glencoe Community Relations Forum for information and dialogue with staff and village officials. We will be meeting with affected parties, including the Park District, and we'll have a website resource with in-depth information and with a communications methodology involved in how we can communicate with residents on their questions and thoughts, all of which will be on the website so that everybody will know what we're all looking at and talking about. And the board, after timely notice, will be taking this matter up from time to time in public meetings in the future. I want to assure you there will be ample opportunity for review and discussion among the community before any decision is made on this topic, including opportunities to engage with the village staff. Dave?
I'm just going to lead in this evening and mention, as the village president mentioned, this is what we believe to be the first of many opportunities for information gathering and sharing, and we're nowhere near an end point. Tonight, Dave Mao and Chris Ulm from Strand Associates, Dave Mao, of course, is our Public Works Director, will be giving a presentation to the board and to the public of the Strand report. This report was recently finalized midweek this week. It will be posted on the village's website tomorrow, as will this PowerPoint presentation, so that anybody in the audience or who were unable to participate tonight can read it, can dissect it themselves, and we will have that ongoing discussion. As President Levin mentioned, later in the presentation I'm going to outline the public engagement process that we intend to utilize for this, and that will take place over the next several months. But for now, the overview of what you'll see this evening, kind of the roadmap, is a discussion of the purpose of the study and the selection of the firm. That'll be handled by Dave Mao. And then Chris Ulm from Strand Associates will bring us through the process and the scope of the study, the findings that Strand came upon, the preliminary conclusions of Strand, and ultimately, as I mentioned, the next steps in the public discussion process. So I'm going to turn it over to Dave, who's going to get started and bring us into this conversation this evening.
And I want to emphasize, as we move into that phase, this is not an end, this is just a beginning. This is just a very first step. And there are many of us, such as myself, who have not even had time to fully read the report, so I don't even know all of what's in it. Go for it.
Thank you, Phil, Mr. President, members of the board. Tonight, as indicated, we're going to walk through the water supply plan report that's been prepared by Strand Associates. A little bit of background as we start that. The existing Glencoe water treatment plant was built on Lake Michigan on the shoreline just north of Park Avenue in 1928. The plant has expanded with additions in the 1950s and the 1990s, and while the plant and systems, process equipment have been well maintained, and the village has done a good job over the years in doing that and modernizing process systems, portions of the infrastructure of the plant are nearing or have reached the end of their useful life. We're seeing increased maintenance costs on an annual basis, and of a larger concern are some major components and systems within the plant that because of their age and condition, the concern is without action to replace or upgrade. Failures of those systems could result in a long-term outage at the plant. An example of those types of systems are our raw water intake, which draws water into the plant. That's original 1928 pipe and intake structure. Much of the below-grade infrastructure of the plant, the basins, the suction well, is circa 1930 concrete that is in varying levels of deterioration. Not as easy to maintain as some of the systems and the pumps and the filters over the years. And then the high lift pumps, which are the workhorses of the plant that pump finished water out into the distribution system, several of those pumps are circa 1928 as well, and those are big dollar pump replacements. Another reason we started this evaluation is that regulations and requirements are coming down the pike in the water treatment industry that aren't as easily retrofitted into a facility of our age, size, and configuration. For this reason, in 2012, the village developed an RFP for a master plan. Much like we've done in recent years, looking at our distribution system, this was focused primarily on the production, the water plant system, to begin to look at long-term capital improvement needs for that facility, that system, much like we do with other major infrastructure within the village. Early in that process, the village was approached by the Northwest Water Commission. The Northwest Water Commission is a consortium of 4 communities in the northwest suburbs that was formed in 1957 for the purpose of bringing Lake Michigan water out to the northwest suburbs. The Northwest Water Commission currently purchases their treated water from the city of Evanston. And at this time, the village has had only preliminary discussions with the commission to determine the feasibility of a future partnership. Discussions are on hold as both parties are completing studies on long-term capital needs, and no agreements have been discussed or finalized at this stage. We moved then into a process of moving forward with the water system master plan on selecting a firm to work with the village to provide that outside expertise. With a selection committee, we developed a short list of firms, and an RFP was distributed in January of 2013. Strand Associates of Madison, Wisconsin was selected through a qualification-based selection process. Strand was selected primarily for a number of reasons, not only prior experience with the village and an intimate knowledge and experience with not only our plant and our distribution system, but our staff. Also, Strand is a large organization with a broad water system expertise. As I said, they're based out of Madison, but they've got 350 employees in the Midwest at 11 different office locations. They're a top 200 consultant in the nation. And again, a number of disciplines are their specialty, but the water is one that we've had the most experience with. And then lastly, a familiarity with Lake Michigan area water producers, including many of our neighbors. They having done work directly with Highland Park and Lake Forest, Winnetka and Northbrook. And while they have never done any work for the Northwest Water Commission, very familiar with the water. Northwest Water Commission is one of a number of joint water agencies along the Illinois west shore of Lake Michigan. The individuals that we are primarily working with Strand are lead engineer Brian Hackman and project manager Chris Alm. And as Phil indicated, Chris is with us tonight, and Chris is going to walk us through the core and the highlights of the study that was prepared, and then we'll be prepared to answer questions that the board would have. Chris?
Thank you very much, Dave. And thank you all very much, too, for giving me the opportunity, giving Strand the opportunity to assist on this important project and to present our findings here tonight. The scope of the water supply planning report can basically be broken down into 3 major steps. Step 1 is the general water system inventory. It's an overview of all the assets in the water system. It also included in that step is a water demand characteristics analysis and a storage capacity analysis. Step 2 is a water system model creation and analysis and a future water supply analysis. And then step 3 is the study findings and recommendations. So we're going to walk through each of these steps tonight, and we're going to use actual figures and tables that we've taken from the report. So that's going to help with your consistency and your familiarity as you do review the report. First step is existing system inventory, and this is a schematic that kind of shows your existing system graphically. Of course, you draw water from Lake Michigan. There's a 3,300 foot, approximately 24-inch intake pipe that extends out into Lake Michigan. It feeds an intake structure where low lift pumps pump up into the plant at a maximum capacity of 7.3 million gallons a day. The conventional water treatment plant that you have shown in the box there with a bunch of little processes that I'll get into a little bit later, that has the capability of treating at 8 million gallons per day. It feeds into a 2 million gallon reservoir, or it can be pumped directly into the system from the plant. That 2 million gallon reservoir that you have provides some chemical contact time, but it's mainly bulk storage for peak demands and for firefighting uses. The water distribution system that you do have does have some emergency interconnects with all of your neighbors, but up until the time of this report, the capabilities or the capacity of those interconnects were not really known. Finally, there's a 500,000 gallon elevated tank that you all are familiar with, I'm sure, out on the frontage road. So the next step that we want to look at is the water demand characteristics and the water storage capacity analysis. This table here shows, in the first column there, the historical demands for the average day. It shows the average to max day ratio, the maximum day demand, and the population as it currently stands. So looking back at the historical demands, we can form some trends and some characteristics about how the community uses water. Basically using close to 2 million gallons per day on average. However, you do have max periods of time, extended max periods of time, summer months, where you're using closer to 6 MGD, 5.42 MGD, million gallons per day, sorry. So we're going to use those same characteristics and demands, and we're going to project out 40 years. We're going to look at the population growth that's expected. The village kind of feels like it's going to go up to maybe 9,000 people over the next 40 years. Chicago Metropolitan Area Planning, CMAP, would say you're going to go to 11,000 people over the next 40 years. So looking at both of those, the maximum day demand is the key. You have to design a water treatment plant to meet your maximum day demand. That's regulations that's required. So somewhere between 5.59 and 6.84 MGD in the future. Our report is based on a 6 MGD water treatment plant in the future. Village staff felt more strongly that that's where the population was going to go. However, if it does go closer to the 11,000 people range, you'll see those flows coming up, and the plant could be easily expanded to meet those higher maximum day demands. So that's the demand characteristics. Now the storage analysis, we looked at your current storage volumes. You have an existing 2 million gallon reservoir and the 500,000 gallon elevated water storage tank. This is adequate volume to meet your current and your future max day demands and a 1,500 gallon per minute 2-hour fire demand. So on a maximum day, you could have a fire that requires 1,500 gallons per minute for 2 hours, which is an industry standard for a community that's primarily residential. And you could meet that demand and be able to go on the next day without running out of water. So your storage is good, as it currently stands, for the next 40-year projection. The next step was to create a water model and then to analyze that water model. It's a computerized water model, so we take the GIS data from the consortium and we create a computerized water model. And this was necessary to determine the current system performance. We can analyze that to see if there's any deficiencies or problems in your system. And then we can also use it to forecast the impacts of water supply point changes. And that was the main driving force behind it at this point in time. There was an analogy that your water supply system is kind of like your heart. Right now, your water supply comes from the lakefront and pumps into the system. If you start moving that around where it's at in the system is going to react very differently from the way it does now. So we had to create this water model as we move the plant around in different locations in the system in order to analyze how it affected the system. We also had to calibrate this water model to match the real world. So we did some hydrant flow testing. We saw how much flow came out of the hydrant, how that affected the pressure when that flow was coming out from that point. And we were able to adjust the computer model to match how the real world acts with Glencoe's water system. So what were the water model findings? The basic analysis of how your current system reacts shows that you provide adequate flow and pressure meeting the desired fire flows. So your system is is in very good shape right now. It also showed that the current system has a backbone transmission line along the Park Avenue and the Hazel Avenue corridors. This graphic here will help show that. This is a graphic that shows your water distribution system. The various colors on in the roadways are the different sizes of pipes. And what I want to draw your attention to is the pinkish and the red pipes along the Hazel Avenue and the Park Avenue corridor. Those are large diameter water mains. Those kind of form a backbone of your system. The water comes out of the water treatment plant, travels down that corridor, and then distributes to the north and to the south from that backbone. And so this is going to be important information as we start to investigate alternative supply points and supply options, that backbone system.
We're going to tag team this a little bit. The village staff and Strand worked together in the review and analysis of possible water supply alternatives using two assessment tools as a way to compare alternatives. Those being community impacts and engineering feasibility. And under community impacts, things like cost, specific needs of the community, locations where a water supply system might be located in the community, how the village would be able to control and oversee that, available land, open land, and what disruption element would be involved by moving a water supply system into different locations within the village. So that was kind of the community impacts piece of our criteria.
And then the considerations for engineering feasibility focused on engineering best practices and regulatory requirements in the decision-making process. So a thorough water system understanding lays the foundation for the future water supply analysis. So now that we have an understanding of all the current components of the system and an understanding of how the water distribution system reacts, it was time to investigate basically three options that were investigated for future water supply. First one is the purchase of water from neighboring communities. Second one is rehabilitation of the existing water treatment plant. And the third one is to build a new water treatment plant. We looked at both inland locations and at lakefront locations. So just to lay the table here, this is an introductory graphic that shows all of the locations that were looked at. There's three blue dots, one near Highland Park that was looked at for wholesale purchase of water supply from Highland Park, one over on the west side for wholesale purchase from Northbrook, and one on the south side for wholesale purchase from Winnetka. Those were the three wholesale supply options that were investigated. There were three lakefront options investigated, basically to the north of the existing water treatment plant, on the existing water treatment plant site, and south of the existing water treatment plant site. And then there were four different inland locations investigated, one out near the tower site, one at Forestway Drive, one at Dundee Road, and then one at the at the Public Works Garage facility. Before we go into the analysis of those, there's some terminology that I want to lay out here. You're going to see OPCC, Opinion of Probable Construction Cost. And that's our engineer's opinion of probable construction costs using 2015 pricing. We look at equipment prices, material prices, facility construction prices, and that's what goes into that. We also add on general conditions. There's a cost that the contractor incurs for installing these things. And then there's technical, professional services, and contingencies that are also included in that opinion of probable construction cost. So diving into it, purchase of water from neighboring communities would be the first one that we want to look at. Now, each neighbor that you have controls their own water system. In other words, they have their own water treatment plants. They have the ability to commit to selling you water. They're not dependent on somebody else to deliver that water to them who has more control over that water than they do. So we met with each of these three communities, Northbrook, Winnetka, and Highland Park, and collected data in order to do our analysis. First of all, Northbrook. Northbrook is not a viable site. They do not currently have capacity to meet your maximum data demands and their maximum data demands. There's also significant transmission main challenges associated with Northbrook. They are on the other side of the Edens, and they are on the other side of the Skokie Lagoons, which creates those types of challenges, environmental challenges. Winnetka, also not able to supply both their maximum day and your maximum day due to lack of capacity. Highland Park is capable of meeting their maximum day and your maximum day with their current capacity. So we conducted some water modeling. The existing connection that you have with Highland Park is not capable of meeting your maximum day demands. We then modeled some improvements to that water distribution system in an attempt to get Highland Park water to flow by gravity, basically, or by pressure, without having to add pressure through a pumping station. We ran water mains down, they're shown in blue here, down closer to that backbone. You're going to see all the supply stuff trying to get closer to that backbone, and then also a water line over to a recently installed water main down Sheridan Road. Still not capable of flowing by gravity and meeting your maximum data demands. So, in order to try to avoid pumping and continue to meet by gravity, we looked at Highland Park and Winnetka both supplying water to the village. The existing connections for neither were able to meet the maximum day demands. However, with the improvements to the water mains, you can see here the yellow line, a 12-inch line coming up from Winnetka to the backbone, and the blue lines coming down from Highland Park to the backbone. That was able to meet by gravity the maximum day demand of all these communities. However, that would result in you purchasing water from 2 different supply locations, which I have never seen done, and I would not recommend doing that. I think it would be difficult to operate, and it would be agreement issue. So, purchasing water from Highland Park with a pump station is the only viable option that we found for purchased water. Basically, putting a 6 MGD booster station and these 16-inch transmission lines that you're seeing here into the village, that was able to provide enough water to meet the maximum day demands. The cost table here also shows the improvements of a 2 million gallon per day booster station on the existing reservoir. With your water treatment plant gone, the pumps for that reservoir will be gone with it, so you have to put a pumping station on that reservoir, that existing reservoir that you have, in order to make it operate. I've also got shown here, and this is important, a 2 million gallon reservoir and 2 million gallon per day booster station. I told you your water storage was fine, and that's true. However, in most cases, and it would be highly recommended that if you are getting your water supply from another community in a single source, you put in 2 times your average day demand in storage. This way, if something goes wrong with that, that buys you an added buffer in order for them to get the problem figured out before it becomes your problem. It's common practice around here with a lot of supply communities for that to take place when there's no redundant water supply. So you see the cost of $8.3 million for that connection, $379,000 to demolish your existing water treatment plant. Total construction probable cost for this, $11.7 million. Okay? Some advantages and some challenges of purchasing water from neighboring communities. The advantages, it gets you out of the water business. You could also reduce or repurpose water production staff and associated costs. Some challenges, perpetual loss of control of the water supply and the rates. Also, you are still going to be responsible for the water quality. Where Highland Park drops it off, and to the point where you deliver it out the taps for your residents, you're still responsible to maintain a clean water supply. So you're going to have to keep licensed water staff in place to keep your public water supply license. Water rates for Glencoe residents will include not only the purchase of the water, but also the system maintenance. You're still going to have costs associated with maintaining the entire water distribution system. That has to be tacked on top of the cost to purchase water. And then again, that additional water storage facility is strongly recommended that you would need to provide 2 times your average day. So moving over to if the village determines it appropriate to continue to produce water rather than purchase water, 2 options exist. You can rehabilitate your existing water treatment plant to replace the deteriorated infrastructure and equipment, or you can build a new, fully modernized plant. First, we'll talk about rehabilitation of your existing water treatment plant. So the slide shows a graphic of the water treatment plant location and layout. It's very likely that the rehabilitation will have to expand in kind of the only direction it can toward the lakefront as you add new technology and processes to it. The cost table shows that there's a repair to the intake structure, but it shows the complete replacement of that intake, that 24-inch intake piping, 3,300 feet out into the lake. So the total intake rehab would be $3.6 million. The cost to rehabilitate the water treatment plant and with modern equipment, $13.9 million. And then you see here the Highland Park water supply and booster stations. Now some of these costs are coming from the previous slides with the connections. It's going to be highly recommended that if you go this route, you install or you bolster that water connection with Highland Park. As you start going into this existing water treatment plant and rehabbing some of these processes, you might uncover something that takes this plant out. And that could result in some bad times if you don't have a backup water supply. You know, no one can tell you what you're going to run into, but it could run into some extended outages, which would be bad. So the total cost that we figure for rehabilitating your existing water treatment plant, and that's with that connection, $31.2 million. And this cost does not include the cost of purchased water from Highland Park should something happen. And there's also a need to rehabilitate your existing reservoir, and the reservoir is not something that you can currently rehabilitate without taking it completely down and offline. So during that period of time, you will lose fire flow capability. Yet another reason that it's recommended that you have this Highland Park water supply connection bolstered to prevent an issue there. So rehabilitation of the existing plants, advantages and challenges. The advantage is that there's a lower initial construction cost compared to a new water treatment plant. Construction impacts are minimized by this. It's all on village-owned property. Minimal change to the exterior of the existing building. Village retains control of the water production. Disadvantages or challenges. There's a higher long-term maintenance cost associated with this. Shorter lifespan than a new water treatment plant. And most of the remaining site space, as you saw on that one slide, will be filled with plant expansion. This requires temporary construction connection with Highland Park, and it adds new technology to an 87-year-old infrastructure. This plant wasn't laid out for the new technology that we're trying to put in there, so that's going to cause some operational challenges down the road as these new pieces are fit into a plant that's not laid out for them. So the last option is building a new water treatment plant. And before we go into the locations and the analysis of the locations, you got a clean slate here if you're building a new water treatment plant. So the treatment process itself comes into a little bit of investigation. We looked at the two most common by far for Lake Michigan water. That would be conventional water treatment process, as you currently have, and direct membrane filtration process. I'll talk about that analysis in a moment. And then, after deciding on which treatment process, we did an analysis of the inland water treatment plant options and the lakefront water treatment plant. First, the treatment process. Option 1, new conventional filtration plant. This is similar to your current process. You bring water in from the lake, you pump it into the plant, you add some chemical, you mix the chemical, you form a flock. You try to form a bigger particle. Then you let that bigger particle settle. Then you polish the water off with some granular filtration, you add some more chemicals, and then you can put it into the system. This is a process that has provided you with good water quality, compliant water quality for 87 years. However, you may need to add additional processes in the future to meet regulations. regulations are getting more stringent, water quality there's an interest on improving the water quality. So here, this table is just a table that looks at the intake and the water treatment plant itself and the demolition of the existing water treatment plant. It doesn't take into consideration the locations of the construction. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Overall cost to build a brand new intake, $7.4 million, a brand new 6 million gallons per day conventional treatment facility, $18.6 million. Total probable cost for conventional filtration, $35.6 million. Treatment option number 2, this is the new direct membrane filtration plant. This is the latest technology. It may meet future regulations without the need for additional treatment. It will provide higher water quality than you would get out of a conventional treatment plant. However, annual operational costs are going to be higher than a conventional treatment plant. It's a one-process plant versus the multi-process plant that I talked about with the conventional. The water comes in from the lake, it goes through a strainer, and then it goes through the membranes, and then it's ready for final chemical addition and out into the system. So, a simplified process and the latest technology. Intake cost is the same, $7.4 million. 6 million gallon per day direct membrane filtration plant, $22 million. Total construction probable cost estimate is $40,240,000. And that's just to show in the intake. That doesn't, it's still not taking into consideration the effects of the location. So, direct membrane filtration is selected for the plant location analysis. It has a slightly smaller footprint, it requires less chemicals, it has a higher potential to meet more stringent future regulations, and it's the latest treatment technology. And just to drive it home, here's another graphic that shows the non-monetary benefits. Membrane filtration, with all these different aspects, meets every one of them, whereas conventional filtration may not, and in some cases it doesn't. The other aspect of membrane filtration that I want to point out to you is if you push membrane filtration beyond its design capacity, it will be much more forgiving than conventional filtration. That's why the greater than 6 sign is there. It's very likely that if your demands increase above 6 MGD, this plant will allow that to happen. So, with the treatment process selected for analysis, we started off looking at the inland options for the new treatment plant. Dundee Road West School site is shown as number 1 there. Forestway Drive, Cook County Forest Preserve District site is shown as number 2. Public Works Garage Facility site is number 3. And the Village Water Tower site is number 4. I'm going to go out of order a little bit as I discuss these. But the Dundee Road site, west of the West School site, it's shown there in the red box. It's just to the west of the school in the open space there. This option resulted in significant loss of park and school property. It also required the extension of raw and treated water mains. Raw water main is not shown in this graphic, but we have to get raw water from the lake somehow to this plant. That's a large diameter water transmission main, and that would have to go through a corridor there. The treated water transmission mains are shown in this graphic. Once the water is sent out of the plant, it's now going into a different part of the system, so your water distribution system has to be bolstered in order to get that water back to the backbone, and in order to get water to locations that was coming from a different direction in the past. So there's major impacts to residential areas. Because of this site was no longer investigated. Forestway Drive site is somewhere on Cook County Forest Preserve District property out in this general area. It was selected because of its proximity to the backbone. However, village staff has had direct contact with the Cook County Forest Preserve District, and they've been pretty clear that they generally will not make property available for this type of use. Again, raw water mains have to come out to this site somehow, so a corridor has to be created for that to happen. And then you can see some bolstering of the treated water system to get water back at the supply is coming to the backbone. Again, major impacts to residential areas because the properties probably not going to be available. This one was not further investigated. Village water tower site was looked at. This is an IEPA regulated landfill site. It is highly unlikely that IEPA will allow you to put a water treatment plant on an IEPA regulated landfill site. There's also some environmental issues in crossing the Skokie lagoons and the Edens with raw water and treated water transmission mains. And there's hydraulic deficiencies out here that the 10-inch line that goes across the lagoons will not carry much water, certainly not the entire village's needs. So that water main has to be replaced with a much larger main. Those costs alone are detrimental. So this site, mainly because of the IEPA regulation, was also no further not further investigated. Finally, the Public Works Garage facility site. This site was the only viable inland site that we investigated. It would require a new Public Works facility. You can see there the yellow box indicates that the Public Works garage parcel, the street right-of-way to the south of that parcel, and both of the parking lot parcels to the south of that would need to be taken up by this new water treatment plant. So a new public works facility would have to be constructed. It would likely require a parking structure to replace the lost parking spaces from that lot. And again, you'd have to get a raw water transmission main to this site somehow, so a corridor would have to be created. However, it's on the backbone, so no distribution system improvements were necessary to distribute that treated water. So some advantages and challenges associated with the Public Works Garage. It is the only viable inland option. It is on village-owned property, and it is close to the backbone. Challenges, there's costly relocation of the existing garage and parking lot. Those costs are included on that opinion of probable cost to the right there. There's difficult site security. There's loss of public roadway with this option. There's access and delivery issues. Basic operation of a water treatment plant would probably be difficult. And it's not in character of the downtown. So that was the inland options. Now switching over to the lakefront options, there's three possible options that exist. On the existing water treatment plant site was one we looked at, south of the existing water treatment plant site, and north of the existing water treatment plant site. We'll start with on the existing water treatment plant site. The graphic to the right there shows, showed up a little bit better, but it shows the new water treatment plant on the existing water treatment plant site and a new intake extending out into the lake. It shows a new pumping station being added to the reservoir and some rehabilitation inside the existing reservoir. Those costs are summarized on the graphic to the left. And the one thing I want to note is that 6 NGD booster station and 16-inch transmission main costs are $44,100,000. That's the cost to connect to Highland Park and to install that infrastructure. Obviously, it is not possible to demolish the existing water treatment plant and build the new one without the need for an alternative water supply. That connection to Highland Park must be built for this option. That connection to Highland Park must be used throughout the entire duration of construction for this option. The $47.8 million that makes up the total opinion of probable cost for this does not include the cost of purchased water during construction. I'll pull those in a later slide. So advantages and challenges associated with this, it's on village-owned property is an advantage. There's freedom of architectural design. There's a completely renewed water treatment plant with the latest technology. The challenges, you do have to install that connection with Highland Park for water supply during construction. You're going to have restricted access to the boat or beach, both during construction and long-term. It'll also have higher costs than other lakefront options, as you'll see. Moving to the south, looking at that option, again, you can see the footprint to the south of the existing water treatment plant. Costs are the same. The same steps have to be taken. The reason for the 6 NGD booster station and 16-inch transmission main and that whole connection to Highland Park is basically similar to rehabilitating your existing water treatment plant. You have to get into that existing reservoir. You're going to lose fire flow capabilities at that point in time. You could also run into a problem where there's an outage, and that emergency backup supply is going to be well worth the money at that point in time. Again, this cost, $47.8 million, does not include the cost to purchase land or the cost associated with purchasing water throughout construction. Advantages: the existing water treatment plant stays in service throughout most of the construction, mainly village-owned property. There's a right-of-way there that takes, it can't all fit in the right-of-way, but a good portion of it can. There's freedom of architectural design, gives you a completely renewed water treatment plant with the latest technology. It's lower cost than building on the existing water treatment plant site. Some of the challenges: some property must be acquired. Connection with Highland Park for water supply during construction is recommended. It's something that you might be able to be comfortable enough to drop off. If you do some of the connections that affect water supply during low use times, you might be able to do it without impacting your fire flow. There's also restricted access to the Boater Beach. North of the existing water treatment plant, you can see that in the graphic there. Very similar, identical costs at this preliminary stage to south of the existing water treatment plant, $47.8 million. Again, same, the 6 million gallon per day booster station and transmission main is in there for reservoir rehabilitation and for connections to existing things which might present an outage. Cost doesn't include land or water during construction, the water purchase during construction. Advantages: the existing water treatment plant stays in service throughout most of the construction. A portion of this project is also on village-owned property. Freedom of architectural design. Completely renewed water treatment plant with latest technology. It provides contiguous beach operations. It has lower cost than on the existing water treatment plant site again. Challenges: construction and permanent access will be difficult. Getting the driveway from the Park Avenue to the plant site is an issue. Property must be acquired. Again, the connection with Highland Park is recommended. You lose a separate and distinct Boater Beach with this option, and there are neighbor impacts. So this is a summary table that lays them all out side by side, and it also adds in the anticipated cost of purchasing water during construction. You can see the rehabilitation of the existing water treatment plant is lowest for staying in the water business. New water treatment plants, the lakefront site is the lowest, with the public works garage being the highest. Purchasing water from Highland Park is $11.7 million, the lowest overall construction cost. We'll talk about that in a minute. But you can see with the purchased water cost during construction that only the one where we're building over the existing site includes 2 years worth of purchasing water. The other ones we've assumed 4 months of water purchase during those construction operations. So clearly, connecting to Highland Park versus building a new plant has the lowest capital cost today, but Strand and Village staff work closely to look at the long-term cost and provide a comparison to produced water versus purchased water over time. On the y-axis here, you see costs that are increasing, and then on the x-axis, you have time per year as it extends out. The blue line is the cost for the village to amortize the debt of a new water treatment plant over a 30-year period and to operate and produce water. The red line shows the cost to amortize the construction capital costs over 25 years and the costs associated with the village for purchasing that water. And you can see at about 30 years, it's where it flip-flops and the new plant becomes less than purchasing water.
Larry, is this a good time to ask questions or just wait till the end?
Better just wait.
Wait,
till the
you
end,
bet.
other than-
Yeah. So, in summary, this, again, you've seen this slide before. This kind of summarizes the findings. The red, the facilities, or the sites shown in red, not viable. Sites shown in yellow is the only viable inland option reviewed, and the sites shown in green are the recommended for further study sites. Final recommendations of the report: if the village determines it appropriate to become a wholesale purchaser of water, consider purchasing from Highland Park as a sole source. If the village determines it appropriate to continue to produce water, consider construction at the lakefront to minimize the cost and impacts to a majority of the village residents and to reduce the amount of additional infrastructure. So,
Andrew, do you have questions?
It is certainly not intuitive to think that at any point in time that it would be less expensive from an operating cost to operate our own water plant versus the incremental cost to Highland Park to supply. So it's just that line graph, just it kind of defies what I would consider basic logic as a layman, that we're talking about somebody else's incremental cost to add a bit more flow, no pun intended, through an existing facility versus operating a wholly separate facility. How can that be true?
you're paying some additional cost for their distribution system and for their operation and their staff. They make a profit on their water, plain and simple, and you're paying that profit. And I think that that's where the main makeup is over time. You can control your costs better. You cannot control their costs. This is assuming a flat, increase. The people that are on City of Chicago water right now will tell you that that might not happen either, and they're looking for other options for supply as well. These are based on actual costs from village staff for operating the current plant. We've added costs that we know from experience for operating a direct membrane filtration plant on top of that. We've amortized those costs to build all that infrastructure. You can produce water a lot cheaper than you can buy it from Highland Park.
And that's predicated upon them sticking with what is their current rack rate price. Do they sell water to others, and that's what we're benchmarking off of?
Yes.
And obviously, we haven't negotiated anything,
Correct.
so
And-
it's
and-
a bit of a guess.
And the prices used here were based off of their current ordinance price for what they would wholesale. There are communities that have negotiated a better price and have a better price than that. But we were conservative in using the higher price that is based on their ordinance in case Glencoe couldn't negotiate to the same level. But yes, these costs are based off of Highland Park's ordinance.
What's your guess if we were to negotiate a long-term contract, how that would compare against us, the operating cost of an entirely separate? I mean, it's like we're negotiating with somebody on their incremental capacity versus our operating cost of an entirely separate facility.
It is my understanding, I've worked with Highland Park and some of the communities that purchase from them. It is my understanding that they are pretty fair and the price is consistent. So I would say your odds are pretty good at being able to negotiate a similar price, but I am not. I'm just a guy.
Trustee Hayek, if I might be, I would add, I think a component of this particular option that will be very important as we move forward and the board considers whether this option in particular should also move forward, is to do more analysis, net present value analysis, additional analysis of what we would anticipate some of their upcoming capital costs might be looking out a decade or so. As Chris mentioned, I think this was intended to give kind of a snapshot in time of what we might anticipate utilizing information that we had at hand. But I think it does require additional info.
And this is really based on construction costs. it doesn't take into account a lot of things that are going on, and a lot of costs that were not looked at here. So I mean, there's a lot more analysis. The question is, do we go forward and spend the time and money to do the added analysis on possibly buying water in the long run? And just as there's a very thorough analysis of how we're going to grow, what are our needs, how are those costs going to be met, and so on. You'd have to do a very similar analysis of Highland Park in order to check where they're going. And then you'd have to understand fully the differences and whether is going on in the industry now is Chicago's materially raising its rates and people are increasing their profit margin. That's one of the reasons why Northwest is starting out. So there's a lot of dynamics going on that one would have to go through in order to actually have a firm or fair analysis of the total cost of all of this.
Yeah, I mean, but the net present value analysis would also include not spending an additional $39 million today.
Correct. That's correct.
But all of those,
Yeah.
when we pick the ones going forward, then you got to go in. It didn't make sense to spend the money on everything that was put on the board unless we thought they were viable. So the question is, you can't do the net present value, you can't do the things, you can't see where they reverse. Just as it's cheaper to rebuild where we are, but that doesn't take into account that if you rebuild, you have an entirely different useful life than if you build a new plant. And therefore, when you look at the net present value of all of it, the figures diverge. None of that analysis has been done yet until we know what are the candidates that remain in the group to be looked at.
The rehab option, which looks like it has a much lower face cost, but it's a very different time frame, right? At the end of that period, you still have to go back to where these other options are.
Yes, I would not recommend rehabilitation. I believe that you're throwing, the difference in cost was $5-6 million at this preliminary stage, and so for $35 million, you're not getting anywhere near a new plant. So it's putting money on an old foundation. It's building on an old foundation, and like I said, trying to put new technology into these existing old technology layouts is going to cause operational difficulties. And in the long run, if we did the same analysis, it would show that your maintenance costs for rehabilitating are going to increase significantly.
Okay. And the options that require purchase from Highland Park or whomever, you've given us construction costs, but not the cost of purchasing the water, because we don't know yet what the cost of purchasing that water would be. Is that correct? Or we do know what the cost would be?
I'm sorry, can you start that?
There's two things that we're buying if we do that. One is the physical improvements to make it happen, and the other is the water itself. Have you priced the water itself into this?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Is that this slide here?
Yeah.
Yes. So that column, purchase water cost during construction.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Adds on the cost that we foresee. We've got 4 months in these other options. Obviously, the full 2 years of building a new water treatment plant on the existing one is going to happen, the $3.7 million. But we assume 4 months that you would need to purchase with the other options.
Got it.
To result in that total.
Thank you. Thank you.
I assume there's also questions if we were limiting the options on that as to whether, in some of these, such as if we were going to reconstruct the existing plant, or some of these that we might, through a combination of purchasing from various parties where it's short-term needs, we might not have to at this stage spend the cost to establish the full connections with Highland Park and Winnetka, and that, so that there are still studies necessary before we know if we'd have to do that to build at the beach.
Yes, correct. Once we find out as engineers that your existing connection, as you have them, won't meet maximum day demands, we kind of have to recommend that you build a connection that meets maximum day demands. However, like you said, construction operations that result in outages from the water treatment plant, could be met from the existing water connections during lower than max day demands, during average day demands, during winter months, to result in that savings.
If I may, back to the issue of purchase of water from Highland Park, what's the time frame that 11.7 million covers?
The time frame to construct those facilities?
No, the 11.7 million buys us water for what period of time?
Oh, there's no water purchase, that's just the
That's the construction
that's a
cost. So
pumping
the
station.
water purchase from Highland Park is an additional cost.
Well, I think that's the graph.
Yeah,
So I
that's where-
think the
Yeah,
question
that's,
is, how's
okay,
the
thank
purchase
you.
cost compared against
Right.
operating
So-
plant?
We have,
Yeah.
and I mentioned this earlier to you, we have some homework to do around financial analysis and net present value that is not part of the engineering design. It's just our homework about how we understand the options here. And we have not done that. I did read your report, but I've only read it once. I think it deserves more than one read. A lot of thought went into that, and we do appreciate that.
And I'm sure over the next few months, we're gonna be reading it a lot.
After May, I probably will stop reading.
Larry, I had a question. My interest is in the membrane. Is this really, I get the feeling it's leading edge. Nationally, how many of these systems are membrane? Is it less than 10% or 5%?
Oh, wait, I don't want to give you a number there. The numbers are, the number of plants on Lake Michigan are certainly increasing rapidly, though. Cryptosporidium and Giardia are mainly cryptosporidium, which was a cryptosporidium issue in Milwaukee several years ago. But you know, those two pathogens and spores are leading to this type of technology being required. Your conventional filtration process will not treat that to the level that a new membrane, that a membrane facility will. Direct membrane filtration is a process that's used in Highland Park, it's used in the forest.
Did they put it in recently?
Highland Park did put it in recently.
And does Chicago use it?
No, they do not, they use conventional.
Just for clarification purposes, over the last 10 years, because of the experience and understanding what it takes to clean and how to size cleaning it in relationship to membrane and all of that sort of thing, it is my understanding that that process has progressed materially and that it's a very different process today than it was when, say, Lake Forest put it in.
Absolutely, it's been refined heavily since then, and it has grown.
So, with the water purchase option, getting a better sense of what those numbers might be, say in worst case scenarios, that's gonna be done through our finance department, probably, to work those numbers. I mean, I'm just surprised they can come up with anything at all, really, because those are utterly out of our control. I mean, I assume Highland Park has to, I mean, we would be a captive buyer.
Correct. Yeah, once you demolish that water treatment plant,
We buy from them, or we take another few years and another $50 million and build our own eventually if we're not happy, but that's.
Correct.
Well, how long a contract can you do that, or is standard?
I've seen in my experience when I worked with the Village of Deerfield, who purchases still water from the city of Highland Park, 25-year agreements is fairly typical with
It's
water.
not like every year.
No, I understand that, in 25 years, the difference.
There are a lot of aspects that have not been fully researched and put into the question of purchasing water. There's a great deal of having to do with how you handle changes that are coming down the road. What happens to those capital costs? What about the growth of the suburb and the person whose water you're purchasing from that affects what they're going to charge and what capital costs that they're going to pass on that you're going to pay for a much broader community. They're once you give up control of what you do to protect your residents and how you produce it, those are very important elements that we will have to study and look at in conjunction with that if we decide to go forward with this. the world of how you sell water and the cost of water under those circumstances is changing rapidly because as more and more straws are going into the lake and the way it's developing, it's becoming a much more divergent, as you sit and talk to village presidents who have water and are selling it, much more divergent question of what do you charge, even if you keep the profit margin and if the base water costs go up dramatically because of the restraint on being able to get water and then affects rates. There are a whole host of things that go into how do you look at what it's likely to cost you over the next 100 years, which is the length of time you would have a plant if we built it, and both giving up the control and the costs that have not been studied as part of this. This really is focusing on the construction issues, and even based on that cost differential, is try to decide, based on construction, when our construction drops off in 20 years, what really happens to the cost to us, how much more are residents then paying than they would, because you gotta remember, we have the advantage of a plant that was built long ago, construction paid off, and then we've been in the maintenance phase, so our water costs have been much lower than our neighbors for a long time. So there's a lot left to be looked at.
I would just add to that staff is already beginning to assemble data, but there will be certainly things that are outside of our purview from the perspective of being able to forecast. I do believe that there's likely going to require at least a rate analysis done to understand better what would be the rate impact to the community in these various iterations. And some of those factors, I believe, are going to require us to utilize some resources relative to consultants. But that is certainly something that I think will aid the board as we work through this in determining which of these alternatives fall off the list and which don't.
And when you look at it, for example, when we had the graph that showed the two lines diverging in that, those were based on vanilla or very plain methods of financing and very straight things for the purpose of giving illustration. In the corporate world, when you look at those kinds of things, you start looking at all the other variations with refinance and spreading the costs and what you do that could dramatically lower our costs in the early years by changing how you amortize the real cost of the plant over time, and that one would have to spend time having experts look at and talk about what are the other factors we could do to bring the costs down and to make it favorable one way or the other. And so those studies haven't been done yet. The question here was to try to narrow in on what options we should really look at going forward. Do them in depth.
You want to tell us what we're going to do for process in the near future for this? How do we digest this, and what are our next steps, and what kind of timing are we looking at on those, please?
Thank you, Chris.
I will. I'll handle that. I think there are, as we've discussed this evening, a great many data points that are still to be generated. I think, as I see it from staff's perspective, this is now the opportunity to begin to digest it as the board is, and our first steps are going to be to begin to look at some of this data, to start to pull it together and communicate that back with the board in a variety of ways, but certainly through this media. I also would anticipate that, as I indicated before, if the necessity for consultant assistance becomes apparent, that would be something we'd be bringing back to the board as well, and on relatively short order, so that there would be no slowing of this process. I think it's an important one that we continue to outline and to really refine, so that when the board is at a point of making a decision, it feels as though there is adequate work that's been done and the information that they need is at hand. So I do anticipate that we're going to need to take that step, and we'll be doing that soon. I think that another piece of it, and we do outline it up here, is public engagement, and it's critical to this process as well, that the board have the opportunity to hear from the community and to understand concerns and issues that come up relative to what has been presented tonight and what will be presented down the road. In the short term, as I mentioned, we will have certainly continued presentations before this board in this forum likely, and we would be doing that as we always have and advising the community of those meetings in advance. We have put in place a website or web page on the village's website that will be dedicated to this. As I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, this evening's presentation, the PowerPoint, as well as the full text of the report will be posted and available tomorrow, and the community can begin to digest this. I think it's important to note that the board really just received this last night, and this is fairly new information to everybody. And so we want to provide the opportunity for the community to read and digest and understand and ask questions. So that therefore leads us into really a dynamic public engagement process. We are planning to host an open house sometime during the month of April, where our staff and Strand are going to be available to probably present a very similar presentation to what was made tonight and take questions and work through that with the community. Our Community Relations Forum is going to resurrect a process that used to take place years ago, which were, I think, lovingly referred to as community coffees or neighborhood coffees. Kind of small group settings and presentations that staff will be present at and will be gaining feedback from the community, those who are interested in this. And we need to meet with the necessary stakeholders that have a part in this overall plan. That includes the Park District and a number of other stakeholders. We do need to continue to keep them in the loop on this and get their feedback and perspective. All of that really being laid out over the next several months, and will continue, I think, as the village president mentioned at the beginning, really for at least what we'd anticipate the next year plus of data gathering. There is not a great need for a decision to be made immediately. The village has a great history, I believe, of looking at our long-term needs and being well prepared to address them. This is very much within that vein. If it hasn't been made clear up to this point, we are looking at a construction process that is no less than 5+ years out. We are not in a hurry to make this decision. We're in a hurry to make sure that we're getting information out and we're hearing it. So this is a long-term process that staff is going to be very engaged and encouraging the engagement of the community to gain that insight from the residents, and then bringing that back to the board to allow the board to digest that as a component of its deliberations on next steps.
Okay, and I've referred to this as the informational and learning portion of the phasing of all this, because this way it is now the report on the village website. The community can have time to digest and read it and think about questions and thoughts that relate to it, so that when they get to doing things like coming to the open house or the coffees or whatever, they'll have had an opportunity to look at it and figure out what their questions and thoughts are, and give and enter into what I would call a healthy dialogue, so that we on the board get the feedback and understanding and work with it and take that into account in making any decisions that we make down the road. Are there any more questions with respect to this?
Just one other thing. I'm really glad to see so many people here engaged in this, and I hope you'll all be ambassadors to tell your friends and neighbors how interesting water is, and get them involved in the process as well. It helps all of us to get that impact.
And the one thing I would add to that, and I agree, I'm happy to see a large crowd of people who are interested in this topic. If you would like to be updated on process. I encourage you, if you've not already signed up for Glencoe Connect, to do so. We will be utilizing that tool to distribute information on upcoming meetings. As I mentioned, or as was up on the slide before, there is an email address dedicated to this topic, waterplant@villageofglencoe.org. If you have questions, feel free to send them directly to that. What our plan is to do is to assemble questions as we receive them and post both question and answer to that website, so that if there is interest, people can use that really as a tool toward educating themselves. So,
And we can't predict whether reading this report in its entirety will either put you to sleep or wake you up, but one way or the other, I think it's really worth it. Okay. Any other questions? All right. If there are no other questions, then I would like to hear a motion to adjourn. That concludes our business.
So moved.
Do I hear a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Can I